Hey guys, this is Nev K with Resist Trump Campaign, and this is the Rise and Resist podcast, the official podcast of the campaign. We coach activists to lead lawful, nonviolent civil resistance to Trump and his enablers. I have with me a special guest, Kevin Bell. I almost said Cam Bell. Sorry about that, Kevin. It's
All
actually
good.
Kevin Bell with Free Information Group. He's an attorney and public records litigator who has led and supported investigations into a number of different areas, including land use matters, law enforcement, and public health. Um, Kevin currently is a principal in the Free Information Group, which is a law firm focused on FOIA litigation. Is that correct, Kevin?
That is correct, Evan.
Thank you. Hopefully, the audience remembers our names and doesn't mix us up after this call.
That's okay.
Okay,
I mean, look, there's
so
a lot of Kevins in the world that I got to compete with for name recognition, so that's all right.
okay. um, as far as today goes, Kevin, you and I had just discussed about, talking about the news, talking about some of the stuff that we talked about in the pre-production setting. Where should we start?
I don't know, wherever you're comfortable. I'm happy to jump right into like what the firm does, but if you want to go over some happenings first, just to ground us in a place and time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could start with like the latest news of America and see where that takes us.
Great. Well, I'm sure that nothing anxiety-inducing is happening in the news this week.
You're probably wrong about that. I mean, I guess it depends on who you are, right? Like, if you're MAGA, it's been a great week.
I mean, I don't know, even for them.
Yeah, man. So I'm looking at Memorandum, which is like my favorite news aggregator, and it looks like Trump is doing a huge regulatory rollback of climate, which seems to be setting the standard for the Trump kind of era, which is to say this is about oil.
Yeah, well, it's about oil. It's also, I think, just sort of a general reaction to the concept of government being an entity responsible for doing anything other than inflicting suffering on people.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I mean, the specifics of this as a former environmental attorney as well are, pretty complex. I mean, it's an attempt to eliminate the endangerment finding that is it underscores a Supreme Court case from some time ago now that upheld the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to find that there would be danger from uncontrolled release of greenhouse gases
Yeah.
as a result of human activity, and that as a result, the agency had the power to regulate those under the Clean Air Act.
Okay.
And so the reversal of that would mean that the Environmental Protection Agency would no longer have the ability to regulate the emission of greenhouse gases and CO2 in particular as something that is a danger to human health. And this has a lot of people rightfully upset.
How does that make America healthy again, though? I mean, that's what we're trying for, right?
Well, it makes America warm again in the sense that we're returning to
Mala.
like pre-Cambrian levels of warming.
Sounds kind of toasty.
I don't know that I necessarily feel that protozoal soup is like the ideal climate condition to live in, but
I mean, I guess if you're bacteria, it would be great.
yeah, they're taking a long view of history, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Trump told Palm Beach police chief everyone knew about Epstein and Maxwell was evil. Huh. Okay. Thanks, Trump. Should we talk about Epstein?
Seems like a bad dude.
Yeah,
The more and
seems
more
like
I
a
hear about this guy, seems like he was up to no good.
yeah. There's probably a few running around, man. Um, let's see. I'm gonna just keep jumping on through the headlines on my memorandum. Um, oh, the father of Liam Ramos says that Liam continues to suffer. Do you know who that is? Liam Ramos? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's the child that was kidnapped by ICE in Minneapolis recently, right?
yeah. Should we keep going to the headlines? This is like literal torture for so many
Yeah,
people.
it's not good. I mean, I'm sure that kid's gonna be suffering for the rest of his life. I mean, Jesus Christ, man, that's like everything about like any interaction that anybody has with the state anymore just seems like it's universally negative.
Yeah,
Yeah, to the extent that anybody approves of it, it's just because they want people to have negative interactions with the state.
yeah. I wonder what Stephen Miller thinks.
I don't. I really don't want to see what that guy's done.
Oh man, how ICE defies judges' orders to release detainees is the next Politico article that is on my feed. Dude, this whole thing is just like a ruse. It's just like a ruse to, break the Constitution and do whatever they want. Is what it seems to me.
I don't know. That seems like it's almost like a greater degree of intentionality than you can necessarily ascribe to these people. It seems more like random thrashing. Like there was this lawyer who I think she was like full time an ICE lawyer that she had been brought in to assist the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis with the like various ongoing actions there. And she
Yeah,
was like appearing in court in front of a federal district judge who was asking her why it was the agency was ignoring so many of the various orders that were being imposed on her, and she just asked the judge to hold her in contempt of court. It's like, please hold me in contempt and throw me in prison so that I can sleep for 24 hours. This job sucks. This case sucks. This court
wow,
sucks. I don't know if she was held in contempt, but I understand that she was removed from her acting position assisting the
wow.
U.S. Attorney's Office there. But yeah, I
So
mean, they're
there's like
bleeding staff so much that like I just don't think that they have the capacity to like
yeah,
respond in a thoughtful manner. And like
yeah. I
leadership
guess,
doesn't care if they comply with stuff; they just want to create content.
yeah, man. Um, you know, I mean, that's kind of like a heroic act to like just tell, the legal system that your government is so bad you'd rather be in jail than do what they say.
I mean, I don't know if she was doing so from a place of heroism or from a place of exhaustion, but
Yeah,
I guess it's more sand in the gears.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, with that, what do you want to jump into some talk about what you do, man?
Sure, I could talk about FOIA all day.
Let's do it, bro.
Um, yeah, so FOIA, for those unfamiliar with the acronyms, the Freedom of Information Act, passed back in the 70s. It recently had a major anniversary of the amendments that were issued to the act that added the cause of action that people can file to sue under it, and really made the statute have a little bit of teeth.
Yeah,
Um, and it's been around for about 50 years now. It is a cornerstone of small d democratic government, in that it is the way that we guarantee that the public has a right to access the public's records. I mean, if the government is an extension of the will of the people, and the government is the people sort of made manifest as a legal entity, then you as a member of the people should have as much right as anybody else to be able to see what's going on in your name. This isn't information that is withheld to any particular individual. It's just sort of within these individual agencies, these legal constructs that exist to enact the statutes that are passed by Congress, sort of, again, as an extension of the votes that you cast as a person to elect particular representatives. So, there's a through line from participation in the democratic process all the way to where FOIA allows you as a participant in that democratic process to see like what information exists in the world, and learn the specifics of how it is that your government is enacting the policies that it is supposed to be enacting.
yeah,
Um, that's sort of the broad strokes idea of it. As for how FOIA works in a day-to-day context, you could think of it sort of as a, if you ever done like correspondence classes, this is something that is more of a pre-internet phenomenon, but you could think of it as a correspondence Google search. You are looking for records within an agency, and you tell them what those records are, either in natural language that gets interpreted by a FOIA officer, or you can give them very precise search terms and areas of interest to search. So I want to search this particular supervisor's emails for any email or Teams chat or other like electronically stored message that contains certain keywords.
Hmm.
And those could be keyed to a policy that they're working on. Often it gets used in a personnel context by. So when I was an environmental lawyer, we also did whistleblower defense. So we represented federal employees who engaged in environmental whistleblowing and were retaliated against for that. It was with a group called Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. Great people, check them out, especially if you're a public employee. And we would use FOIA to get records related to that employee's performance or communications among superiors and supervisors and managers about that employee to see if there was some sort of retaliatory animus that motivated the negative personnel action that they suffered. Did they get fired or demoted or whatever because of some protected disclosure that they made?
Hmm.
And it can also be used for people who are not in government and don't have as much in-depth familiarity with the record keeping processes and systems that exist, just to look into stuff like I mentioned earlier the enactment of particular policies sort of writ large. You can get anything from large generic documents like internal policy manuals. I know people like Ken Klippenstein have used the FOIA to go for a lot of like use of force documents and figure out what law enforcement tactics are supposed to be being used, at least by the book, as
Yeah.
opposed to like what's actually happening in the field. um, I used FOIA under the prior Trump administration. This is still when I was back at Peer to get records regarding the Lafayette Square protest that happened in May and June of 2020. And those were just like a massive trove of documents, and ended up being from like every supervisor or U.S. Park Police soldier who was out, or law enforcement officer rather, who was on the ground. And it was everything from requests for munition refills to sharing posts from activists that they had seen on Twitter as intelligence products, so that they could see who was moving when and what protests were supposed to be happening where. And so it's really useful for an activist who's organizing to be able to see the sorts of coordination that happen against them by law enforcement offices. Coordinating on an interagency basis, or even in the field, the sorts of surveillance measures that are being used against you, the sorts of munitions, and even just the way that the police are talking about you as a protester. um, One of the documents that I found in the 2020 stuff was, there was a post that somebody had made saying that people who participated in a protest were being disappeared. And then the officers like shared that amongst one another because they thought that, they were not disappearing people. And they were making jokes about, haha, we used our secret vanishing ray to make people disappear. And you can just sort of see like the attitude that's being taken towards protesters by the people who are there. Not only because, I mean, I think that everybody knows at a certain degree that there's some contempt between the law enforcement officers who are responding to protests and the protesters themselves, but also to be able to demonstrate as a legal matter that there is bias among the law enforcement officers who are there. They may not be making arrests for proper reasons. There may be some reason that the judgment of the officers was impaired due to some sort of ideological reason, or because they had bad information that they were acting on, that would help in a legal defense case subsequently. There's all sorts of applications.
So if you hypothetically, Kevin, were I don't know, an activist who suspected some sort of nefarious activity around your activism, um, you know, maybe you had a concern about, I don't know, being tracked by NSA or something like that. How would you FOIA that?
Well, being tracked by NSA is very different from having law enforcement specifically doing social media monitoring. The latter, I think it's a little bit more useful for if you're being tracked by NSA and it's being done through a classified system. National security classified information is extraordinarily difficult to get access to under FOIA.
Got it.
Um, I mean, the other thing, it's not super useful on an emergent basis. There are long delays in FOIA between requesting information and receiving it. Most of the work that I do as a public records litigator is in, what I would call a deadline suit, which is that the statute itself says that when you file a FOIA request, the agency has 20 working days, so 20 days not excluding federal holidays and weekends, um, or not including, yes, excluding holidays and weekends. So, those 20 days, which work out to about a month in practical time, to actually respond with all of the records that you requested.
Yeah.
And in my time as a FOIA lawyer, both within government and as a requester, I think I've seen that happen like 4 times, that
Hmm.
you get a full response to a FOIA request within the 20 working days described by the statute, of like hundreds of requests that I've worked on. And so, there's, in the way the statute is written, if the time limits that are set up are not complied with, then the agency has what's called constructively denied your FOIA request, which is something being constructively true. It means that, like, in a strict legal sense, it is true that the agency has not complied with the time limits. Therefore, you can bring a lawsuit basically on the 21st day to say, hey, they haven't complied with this. Can I get a judge to oversee and set a schedule by which the agency will actually comply with this, by
Got
producing
it.
500 1,000 pages a month. But even that takes like 6 months to a year before you get anything super duper useful.
Got it. So, like, if we were to go back to the news that we had just like covered, are there any articles that you had heard me refer to, whether it was this climate stuff that Trump is doing, or like the Epstein stuff, that like kind of connect to FOIA in some way?
Oh, it all does.
Okay.
I mean, FOIA is, I mean, number one, it's one of the only like bipartisan statutes that still exists. Like, there are as many, if not more. I mean, right now, if you look at the FOIA dockets there's this website called FOIA Project. It's very cool, and it keeps track of all the new FOIA cases that are filed. And there are as many right-wing organizations filing lawsuits as there are progressive organizations filing lawsuits, even against the Trump administration. I mean, most of the conservative groups are filing for like historical records based on requests that they filed for Biden stuff, but they're still litigating, and the reason for that is because FOIA has universal applicability. Like, any subject matter basically has a FOIA tie to it somewhere. So I think everybody has an interest in it working properly as a result. And so, just thinking about, you mentioned, the EPA endangerment finding. Environmental records are, or at least were, very much my bread and butter. As in my first role as a litigator and my job in government, I was with an agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and most of the FOIA work that happened there was also based on environmental record keeping. So stuff tied to climate change, the way that the agency is considering the arguments on climate change, the scientific documents that were relied on in getting to that rulemaking. Did they ask a chatbot to come up with a plausible reason to roll back the endangerment finding? Can I get the prompts that they asked that chatbot? Probably. Um, yeah, and similarly on the Epstein stuff, a lot of the work that's being done in FOIA right now is law enforcement facing, for good reason. And with the, I would say, pretty obviously largest public records release in history around the Epstein files, I think that a
Yeah.
lot of people are getting a very firsthand education in the way that public records management does and does not happen in the United States. So, when people are complaining about, over redaction of the names of government officials or people who might be embarrassed, even though it says you're not supposed to redact information just because it's embarrassing. I mean, there's a rule in FOIA that also says you're not allowed to redact stuff just because it would be embarrassing to the agency, and it gets violated constantly anyway, just because, at the end of the day, there's very little actual accountability for violations of FOIA. Even if you are able to get into court, the profligacy with which the redactions are applied is, it's pretty broad, and it's hard to challenge every single thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what is a good, I don't know, rule of thumb for someone who believes that they, I guess, want information and they need to call you?
Uh, I mean, the earlier the better, I would say. If you are going to be looking for some information that's particularly valuable to you, I would suggest talking to, if not us, then some kind of a FOIA expert. If you're a reporter, the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press does a lot of free consultation work. I would say probably half the work that I've done thus far has been sort of unpaid, just spitballing with people about crafting some requests and putting together an administrative strategy for how to target it. I've seen a couple of TikTok videos where people have said that, I filed a FOIA request to the Department of Homeland Security, and I asked for all of these really long documents that, like their internal training manuals and stuff that it's going to take them forever to process, which that doesn't really help that much. I mean, it jams up the gears, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, the mechanisms of state security are being distracted by your FOIA request. Whereas the stuff that does get positive results, it does get important records, are things that are narrow and focused and targeted, and events a understanding of federal record keeping processes, and the sorts of locations you can go and search for, and the types of records that they keep. So um, particular FBI interview documents or after action reports that are being compiled by DHS officers in the field, or the specific communications between on the ground supervisory enforcement removal operations officers and the Department of Homeland Security Public Affairs Office regarding what kind of statements can be made to the media about, for instance, the murder of one of the people on the streets of Minneapolis that happened recently. um, those things that are narrow and targeted and for a small set of records on particular timeframes that that the agency would be particularly nervous about reviewing and releasing. I think that those are a lot more effective, and the best way to come up with a narrow targeted request like that is to talk to an expert who does a lot of stuff like this regularly.
Got it. So if you wanted to learn about how the federal government's Bureau of Investigation uh, treated the pretty or good killings, is that something you could do with FOIA?
Oh, absolutely.
Cool.
um, like I said, it would be difficult to get that information in like a super timely fashion. I know that there are requests that have already been filed. I have looked at and worked with people who are working on requests about just that information. Um, I mean, and you can go all the way from that even down to the sort of less consequential stuff. To for instance, there were, oh god, I forget his name, but the sandwich guy in DC from over the
Oh yeah.
summer who like threw a sandwich at a DHS cop. Um, that resulted in charges getting filed and then dropped, and there was grand jury problems where they couldn't actually get something through a grand jury. Sorry, I'm not a criminal process guy. And ultimately there were all these issues with it before they had to drop the case, and I foia'd myself the records of hey, what happened when somebody told the attorney general about this, like what was her first response to it.
Huh.
Just because, I mean, there's no cope and seethe exception to FOIA, so you have to release all of that information, even if it is just people being mad in their teams chats about something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that the government gets embarrassed about releasing, and so it does tend to draw some like raised eyebrows. Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
but yeah, anything people communicate about can be subject to FOIA.
Gotcha. Well,
Sorry, I know I tend to tangent.
it's fine. Let's see what else this regime is doing today. Trump threatens to block the opening of a new bridge to Canada. Huh. Okay. Um, American optimism slumps to a record low.
What are we down to?
Oh, that's a good question. We're at 59.2% that of U.S. adults who anticipate high quality lives in 5 years, the
Oh,
lowest level since measurement began nearly 2 decades ago. Huh.
honestly, 59% thinking that they're going to have a high quality life 5 years from now feels pretty good to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
I mean,
majority.
anecdotally, I would say that that probably outstrips at least most of the people that I know. Maybe I just have downer friends.
I mean, sometimes downer friends like good music. I mean,
I mean,
they can
that's
be happy
absolutely true.
sometimes. um, let's see. Trump appointed judge rejects DOJ attempt to access Michigan voter rolls. Oh wow, the rule of law came through by a Trump appointee. Amazing.
I mean, this
Huh.
is another thing. So a lot of pro-democracy groups are leveraging FOIA quite a bit just to see how the orders for going after like the voter rolls in Georgia are being distributed. So
Yeah.
communication and coordination from the White House down to DOJ, down to the FBI, and understanding, like, is this something that was purely White House directed? Is this, somebody in FBI who's just trying to earn brownie points by going after voter information? Is this Miller directed, Trump directed? And in court, often the motivation that the government has for doing something can be critical to determining whether or not that action was proper. And both under the Administrative Procedure Act for regulations as well as for enforcement actions, and any time that the government is acting from retaliatory animus,
Yeah.
uh, oftentimes it is easier to defend that as somebody who's subject to that government action. And getting to that information is notoriously difficult because the government from the outside is kind of a black box until you actually dig into it through the use of tools like FOIA. Uh,
But
so
Doesn't FOIA also assume that records are, and excuse my sarcasm, I'm a very sarcastic person. Um, Hegseth was found using Signal to like relay some sort of attack plans. Is that FOIAable?
Yeah, he probably shouldn't have been doing that. But yes, it is. So part of the reason this particular Signal app that they used was like controversial is that there was like a skin on top of Signal that this outside company had developed, and the point of it was to make FOIA compliance, or rather to make Signal FOIA compliant. Even if you had disappearing messages, it would upload a copy of those messages to a cloud server somewhere so
Okay.
that the file management was automatically retained. And I think they stopped using that app because they found that the developer had some security issues where like
Oh,
copies of the messages that were being sent were being uploaded to a offsite cloud that did not have the rigorous security protections that I think something would have had if it was being stored in house.
got it.
Um,
Yeah.
Using Signal on its own is not necessarily a problem, as long as the records are maintained. Using disappearing messages to conduct government business is absolutely a problem because that's just willful destruction of public records.
Right.
The Federal Records Act has the rules as to like when you are and are not allowed to delete stuff, but using disappearing messages to avoid compliance with FOIA is absolutely a problem. I mean, one of the other things that I saw when I looked back through some of the records that I had from the Park Police protest back in 2020, and another example from that is a lot of the orders that were being conveyed were the commander in the field had basically a big notepad, and on the notepad he had written down just like what they were supposed to be doing, and then he took a picture of that and then sent it around to his boys. And that there were orders because the next four messages in response to it were like, Roger, copy, got it, you got it, boss. And then they
Got it.
withheld the image of the notepad itself, and they said that it was deliberative, which in FOIA terms means that it would go to the development of agency policy and was only like a suggestion or a recommendation that didn't
Mhm.
necessarily have any sort of final applicability, despite everybody treating it like it was final afterwards.
Did
And that's the kind of sort of agency lawlessness that I think I at least am most frustrated by in FOIA.
Yeah, I mean, if activists were like, imagining a future in which, those that are kind of running the gears of this regime's operations would be held accountable at some point, down the line, maybe through some sort of, I don't know, tribunal or something, who knows? Can FOIA help today to establish a record of some of the
Oh,
decision making
absolutely.
that, yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you don't use FOIA, then what you're doing is you're relying on whoever subsequently comes into control of those same institutions to be able to look back over the prior 4 years of records to sort of generate their own idea of what had happened.
yeah,
And there's something you can take here from like the Heritage Foundation, even. So over the last year and a half, when I was still working in government, we got hundreds of requests. I mean, some agencies thousands, even like in the course of a given week, from a couple of Heritage Foundation affiliated researchers who were flooding every agency in government with identical, extraordinarily generic requests for politically sensitive keywords. So some of them were searching for information about agency Pride Week celebrations. Some of them were just trying to get an idea of who. I mean, some of the first requests that we got were a list of agency employees who have like particular supervisory responsibilities, as well as lists of like agency organization charts, just to figure out like who the most relevant 50 people out of an organization of like 2,000 might be. And then they would file a bunch of FOIAs for those 50 people after they figured out who it was, seeking, just broad sweeps of politically sensitive keywords, Trump, MAGA,
Wow.
pride, pronouns was one that we got. I had to tell them that we couldn't process pronouns because if you seek, the keyword pronouns in any record sent by somebody who has their pronouns in their email signature, technically every email they've ever sent or received is responsive to that, and we're not going to process 250,000 emails
Yeah.
in response to a single FOIA request when it's that broad, because it just doesn't describe what they're looking for properly. What they did is they used FOIA as a research tool to identify all of the pressure points inside agencies and the people who may be like particularly good targets for the civil service purge that was conducted at the beginning of the Trump administration by heritage aligned individuals who were placed into political power at those various agencies. And to enable that happening, they did a FOIA campaign up front to figure out, who the problem employees were to go after. In addition to
Uh,
sort of like the broad sweeps that they did, cutting, hundreds and thousands of jobs at once. Um,
yeah.
yeah, so uh, I think that it has been done as a means of sort of generating accountability, in the sense that uh, they generated an enemies list based on political
Yeah.
sensitivities. Whereas I think that a progressive organization doing something similar would be able to identify the people who were attached to certain decisions through FOIA in order to know, like, which even career man, like Greg Bovino is a career person. He wasn't like a Trump appointee or anything. Same for Tom Homan. Like, he has been a career guy under Obama for years. And there are a lot of people who are in positions like this who have been willingly enabling a lot of the worst abuses of executive power that we've seen over the last year. And I think that knowing who those people are through use of FOIA now is a good way of informing any subsequent administration, who they should not potentially be trusting to enact the same, like, well-meaning programs that they may be doing in the future.
Gotcha. So kind of what we're discussing is what I interpret what we're discussing is sort of like the Heritage Foundation used FOIA to be extremely thorough and extremely surgical about what they plan to do, or at least who they planned to identify, and then RIF or whatever,
Yeah.
reduction in force. But um,
Well, rifts can't be targeted, but who to remove through whatever means necessary.
right, okay, yeah. Um, and what could be done is from what I understand is that the resistance movement, or some actors in the resistance movement or whatever, could kind of play the same playbook to generate the same sort of roadmap for a new America or something.
Yeah, I don't know that necessarily it would be productive to be as broad as Heritage was, because they were very much, sort of like dynamite fishing. Like, in order to find a couple of records, they were throwing a stick of dynamite into a lake and then seeing what came up. Which was, I mean, I will say, number one, extraordinarily abusive to agency FOIA offices, which, the one that I was in was one of the less affected offices, but still, we had to process, I would say, like, more volume of records in response to a handful of requests from two guys than we did every other FOIA that we had combined. And I think a lot of
Wow.
other agency FOIA, particularly small agency FOIA offices, have very similar stories. Uh, the I think that you can use it in a targeted fashion to look into particular government programs that are going on, to see, who the most enthusiastic enablers of it are, like, within government, as a means of, I don't want to say conducting ideological purges the same way that happened the other way, but at least being able to compartmentalize, like, which programs are going to be enacted by which people. I mean, personnel is policy at the end of the day when it comes to federal stuff.
Say
And
more
I
about
think that's
that. I
something,
don't.
yeah, that
What,
the conservative
yeah.
movement understands really well.
What do you mean by that? Personnel as policy. I've never heard that before.
Personnel as policy is sort of a truism that just says, whoever you put in charge of something is, like you as the president don't get to control everything done by a particular agency. The person you put there does. So if you are putting like a bulldog like Greg Bovino in charge of immigration and removal operations, you have decided that the policy there is going to be maximally violent and geared to create content more than it is to actually, remove dangerous criminals like they said that they were trying to. Because
Yeah.
everywhere that Bavino has gone, he has drone footage and cameramen following him around and conservative podcasters taking clips so that he can put them online. And like, the dude was more interested in generating content than he was in anything else. If you are going to be, if you put somebody else in that position, then it might have different incentives. So one of the most effective agencies under the Biden administration was the Federal Trade Commission, at least in my opinion, under the directorship of Lena Khan, who is a extraordinarily intelligent person who is very deeply committed to the work that she was doing in antitrust and consumer protection within the American economy, and she got a lot of work done because she went in with a mandate, with a deep understanding of the agency systems that she was inheriting responsibility for, and with the legal expertise necessary to make those actions done. A less effective office, in many people's opinion, was the Department of Justice, where a lot of people criticized Merrick Garland for his sort of slow walking of a lot of, for instance, the Trump and January 6 prosecutions, over focus on procedure and technicality, and a reluctance to take sort of big swings. And if you put somebody in charge of that office who is more likely to do the work that's necessary to truly enforce the agency's mission, a true believer, I guess you could say, then you're going to see more effective work. So who you appoint is always a big deal.
Yeah.
I think you see that with the Trump appointees in sort of the opposite direction as well. So yeah, that's what I mean by that, and that also applies down at a more granular level. Which agency supervisors are going to be placed in charge of which agency program implementations, and that's something that people with a more granular understanding of the way that agencies operate are going to be able to use that information more effectively.
Man, we've been going for 37 minutes, Kevin. Can you believe
Oh,
that?
uh, I'm a chatty guy, I guess. I don't know.
Hey, I want to touch on that one thing we talked about regarding these podcasters that are like allegedly embedded with some of like Department of Homeland Security operations. I think we talked about that yesterday. Um, do you want to say more about that, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, this is not like my area of expertise. I'm a public records expert, not necessarily like a right-wing podcast expert.
Yeah,
I do know that there are a great number of sort of agents provocateur who have operated in the right for a long time and who do have very cozy relationships with the government. So, Benny Johnson, Nick Sorter,
yeah,
Andy Ngo, Tim Pool, and at least some of them, or some of their individual, like maybe correspondents, are appearing in the field alongside ICE officers to sort of, I mentioned earlier, like filming sizzle reels, although I think DHS can do that with their own public affairs office pretty effectively. Um, but I can say that there have been instances where people trying to make a name for themselves in right-wing media, or influencers will go and sort of generate conflicts with protesters in the field by shouting a bunch of provocative stuff, trying to get a rise out of people, because as soon as they can get a violent reaction from a protester, or even somebody to go off message for a moment, they can use that as a justification to communicate with their contacts in the administration and say, hey, here's some violent protesters that you should have like a hard line law enforcement crackdown on.
yeah,
And those types of communications are something that I think FOIA will be really effective at, because it's much harder for the government to protect communications between non-governmental people and the agencies than it is sort of internal agency policy development, which there are multiple privileges that can protect.
gotcha. So like Benny, who was it? Benny? What, the podcaster?
Benny
Benny something?
Johnson.
Benny Johnson. So if you were like, hey, I want to see what Benny Johnson, whoever that is, wants, is like communicating with DHS, a FOIA request could help you do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would
Um,
say like the communications between an agency and you know, members of the public who are not agency staff or contractors, even agency communications between them and Congress, are the privileges that the agency, and I'm capital P legal privileges here, so the deliberative process privilege, attorney-client privilege, things like that. Those
Yeah.
only apply to communications within an agency or between the agency and another part of the executive branch, either the White House or another executive agency. So, as soon as you're talking about external communications, FOIA becomes much more effective.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, man. And then we also briefly touched yesterday, Kevin, on we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, like the if you wanted to, hypothetically identify vendors of like pepper balls or other sort of things that are used on protesters, you could find that, I guess, with a FOIA request.
Yeah. I mean, there's a fairly limited universe of vendors of these things anyway.
Yeah,
Like if there's a manufacturer of pepper balls, they're not selling those to anybody but law enforcement. But uh, if you want to look for the specific manufacturers who are doing those sales and the contracts to government, information like the specific price that they're charging and maybe like the manufacturing components of it, those can be considered confidential
trade
commercial
secrets or
information.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They fall under its exemption 4 to the FOIA, the section 552 sub B sub 4 of Title 5 of the U.S. Code specifically. But that is a very broad protection. But one of the things that you can't protect under that is the name of the company that's doing the vending. There was a case that was decided some time ago regarding the provision of chemicals used in lethal injections, and the
Yeah.
companies there tried to protect just the name of their company as confidential commercial information because it would harm their trade competitiveness if they were named as the company that also did the lethal injection chemicals for their non-lethal injection business lines, I guess. And the court determined that that was not protectable. I mean, there has been subsequent Supreme Court precedent since then, but I don't know that it has rolled the tide back so far that even the identities of vendors of certain goods and products can be protected.
Yeah, and identity. I think maybe we can maybe transition in a few minutes, but identities of actors in a democracy feels like something people should be aware of to deliberate on more effective outcomes. There's this like article in I don't know, probably I found on a memorandum or something that talks about how Plato understood why masking would turn ICE agents into devils, which is an interesting, take on, what happens when people can be anonymous without any sort of social, I don't know, repercussions on what they do. And maybe the same applies to corporate persons as well. I don't know.
Uh, yeah, well, I mean, that's remarkable platonic foresight if he was already thinking about ICE agents.
Plato.
But yeah, I mean, I think that when you give somebody the power to exercise lethal force and the trust of, that we as a society have in theory granted to law enforcement to enforce the law, um, the way that that force is applied does need to have a degree of accountability. And when you can't trust the organizations to provide accountability for themselves, then you need to have public accountability so that like when problematic actors are repeatedly doing things. I mean, this is absolutely true in the court context. I mean, part of the Constitution says under the Confrontation Clause, you as a criminal defendant have the absolute right to confront any witness against you in court, and to know who they are that are testifying. I mean, there are very limited exceptions to this in the case of commercial, or sorry, not commercial, but confidential informants, things like that. Again, I'm not a criminal process guy, but
Yeah.
yeah, the knowing the identity of a person who is wielding lethal force is, I think, highly important.
Or selling the
Yeah,
supplies to inject
yeah,
or
and in the
something.
commercial
Yeah.
context as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a company who is selling a product, I mean, just a basic tenet of capitalism is that if buyers and sellers in a market are going to be able to efficiently interact with one another, they need to have information about one another and the products that they're buying and selling. So even before you get the importance of being a company involved in selling lethal injection chemicals or chemical munitions for law enforcement to use against protesters, or some other sort of quasi-military equipment involved. Just knowing things about one another is extraordinarily important. I mean, there are times when anonymity is necessary. I know that the right to privacy is extraordinarily important. There are a lot of things that even under FOIA, I will go out of my way to say to an agency that like I am not requesting. For instance, like if you request somebody's official calendar, I will exclude anything that involves like a member of their family as a part of my
Yeah.
request.
Yeah.
Because some people have like a mixed personal and business calendar. And exemption 6 to FOIA, the personal privacy protection, like does also protect that, but there are also ways that you can say like, look, I'm not even going to try to fight the agency over this. And I do think that the right to privacy is important in certain contexts. I don't know that that would extend as far as a company being able to hide its corporate existence,
Yeah.
uh, and ties to controversial government programs.
Makes sense to me. Okay, so I want to wrap a little bit, Kevin. I want to just give you or invite you to maybe send any final words to our audience that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I guess FOIA is one of the things that I think prior episodes of your podcast is focused on is that anybody can do this stuff. Anybody can go and become an organizer or participate in peaceful protest or otherwise like engage in government because it is a reflection of all of our collective will. And anybody can engage in FOIA too, both on an individual level as well as if you're a small group that you have a particular government program that you're interested in getting more information about. The bar to being able to bring a legal action even against the government is not that high. I mean, there's like a $400 filing fee plus like some attorney time. But the way that our firm was founded was we bring low cost litigation on behalf of small newsrooms, independent journalists, small advocacy organizations, people who they have a very particular need for something, and we try to keep our like hourly prices as low as we possibly can, basically just to be able to afford health insurance for ourselves. um, and FOIA is what's called a fee recovery statute, which means that if you sue the government and you win, then you get your attorney's fees paid for on the back end by the government for the privilege of having sued them. And this means that while it will cost you some money to tie up in court for a while, if it's a good case, and we try to only take cases that are, then you will be able to have that refunded later, and you are not necessarily spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars the way that some people often think about whenever they do cases. I've seen cases that I have been involved in litigating where, the total fees at the end of the case after like 9 months was like, $2,000-3,000, if that, which is still not nothing, and a pretty high bar for a lot of individuals. But even for some smaller organizations, that is the sort of thing that I think is more affordable than some people think it is. And if you are somebody on the ground right now, you're involved in organizing someplace, and you think that there is a possibility that you have an issue that is small enough, targeted enough that we do some pro bono litigation as well. Yeah, we'd be happy to talk to you, even if it's just to consult on like how do I draft a FOIA request that is going to be like most effective in this context. How do I best engage with an agency to make them think that I would be willing to litigate, so that they maybe take my FOIA requests more seriously than all the other ones that they have. There's a lot that we're able to offer that way.
Beautiful, man. Well, thanks again, Kevin, for joining us on the podcast today. It's been a real pleasure hearing about different ways that the law can be used to help people hold our government accountable.
Mhm.
Um, and I love that FOIA is a way to sort of peer into the machinery of this particular regime, and to potentially, put a little sand in the gear to kind of get them to, spend some time doing something useful. That'll help all of us in the end when we want to, find who is responsible for some of the decisions that we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah. Accountability is important. I don't think that the job is about like generating witch hunts or like trying to find targets for ideological purges or anything like that. But if there's a bad actor in government, then I think that it's important that people know about who they are and what it is they've done, so that there could be
Yeah.
accountability for it ex post. And yeah, FOIA is a not the only, but certainly a good way of doing that.
Amazing. Well, guys, you've heard it from Kevin Bell. I want to just alert you guys that Kevin is a partner in Free Information Group, and you can find them at freeinformationgroup.com. Um, this is Nevin Kay, director of Resist Trump campaign. You can find our website at resisttrump.us. And again, we coach activists to lead lawful, nonviolent civil resistance to Trump and his enablers. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.